Okay, then.
Welcome, and thank you all for joining us today. We are thrilled to see so many people interested in and exploring this exciting opportunity. My name is Kristen Lupfer. I'm the project manager of the ARDRAW Small Grant Program here at Policy Research. Policy Research is the program manager for ARDRAW. We assist SSA to administer this small grant program. I am here with Laura King, the Federal Project Officer for ARDRAW at the Social Security Administration. We'll speak later in the webinar and introduce some other presenters from SSA. You will also hear from Margaret Lassiter, the ARDRAW Project Coordinator here at Policy Research. Next slide. We're going to provide you with a brief overview of the ARDRAW Small Grant Program, review the details about the application process, and give you the opportunity to hear from current ARDRAW program participants, McCauley and Jeff Trant. Laura King will then take over and moderate a number of essential presentations from SSA staff on work-related factors of SSA disability determination, SSA's work incentives, real applications of work incentive policies, and the research and policy connections of ARDRAW. We'll wrap up with time for Q&A. So ARDRAW, or Analyzing Relationships Between Disability, Rehabilitation, and Work, is sponsored by the Social Security Administration, or SSA, and the program is managed by Policy Research. So you can find more information and all about that and all about ARDRAW and submit your application online at ardraw.policyresearchinc.org. All right, okay, so this is ARDRAW, a brief history. So ARDRAW is the successor small grant program to SSA's Disability Determination Process Small Grant Program, or DDP, which supported research on the disability determination process. Between 2012 and 2017, DDP funded student researchers successfully completed 49 research projects. And with ARDRAW, we were able to administer up to 25 yearly $10,000 stipends to graduate students for research projects that are focused on disability, rehabilitation, and work. The first ARDRAW cohort began in FY 2017, and SSA funded 11 projects, which are currently underway. And you can use project titles on the ARDRAW website. This is the second cohort, and we hope that we'll be able to fund you this year. The application process is the same, but the list of suggested topics has expanded, which is a great thing. Next slide. This is on the relationship between disability, rehabilitation, and work, as its name indicates. But it really has a significantly expanded number of identified research areas, including characteristics of disability beneficiaries, SSA work incentive programs, workplace accommodations, vocational and other services used by SSA beneficiaries, and other factors affecting the return to work. These factors could include research questions related to youth with disabilities, finances, education, policy, and other impacts such as technology and transportation. A full list of suggested topics is available on the ARDRAW website. But before we move on, we'd like to take a moment to hear about how you heard about the small grant program. So we're going to open a poll here in WebEx. It's about the bottom right corner of the WebEx screen for you. Ready, or should we move on?
It's coming.
Okay. All right, poll is open now. You'll see it in the bottom right corner. It says how to hear about the ARDRAW program, social media, so Facebook or Twitter, a listserv, a university listserv, or other. I'll give you a moment to choose that. all for replying to that poll. It helps us know if we're doing outreach in the right places. So I'm going to now turn it over to Margaret Lassiter, the ARDRAW Program Coordinator, to review the program details and application process.
Thank you, Kristen, and I'd like to welcome you all to the call as well. There we go. So to the eligibility criteria for the ARDRAW program, you must be a full or part-time graduate student in an accredited program at the time of the award. That would the fall semester of 2018. You need an academic emphasis on employment, rehabilitation, disability, public health, economics, social work, occupational medicine, etc. You must be a U.S. citizen or non-citizen national. And I would say here, if you have any question about your eligibility, please reach out to us at either me personally or to ARDRAW mailbox, which is monitored daily, and that contact information will be provided at the end of the presentation. You must also have a university faculty mentor committed to assist in the research from start to finish and to participate in the quarterly calls that we will hold with you. Employees of the Social Security Administration are not eligible, and those receiving funds from other federal sources may not be eligible. Again, please discuss your specific situation with us individually. Expectations are you will complete an application packet submitted online from the ARDRAW website by March 1st, 2018. Students and faculty mentors must participate on quarterly calls and submit deliverables in a timely fashion, which would include, beyond your application, of course, if you're selected, a work plan, quarterly reports, and a 10 to 15-page final research project. The application, as I indicated, the packet is on the ARDRAW website. It includes an abstract and research proposal of 5 pages, proof of access to the data you plan to use for research, IRB approval and time frame. That does not mean that you have to have approval at the time of application, but it does mean that you have to indicate to us how you're going to go about receiving your IRB approval. Resume or CV, and 2 letters of recommendation, which would be emailed directly to ardra@policyresearchinc.org. The submission date is March 1st. We will notify you by May 1st. So the selection criteria, I'm just going to go over this fairly briefly. There's a detailed description of it in the request for application, or RFA. The first level of review is PR staff will look at the completeness of the application packet and assess its relevance to the ARDRAW research objectives. Then I will look at it more deeply, and I may provide some feedback on suggested improvements to your proposal before the official review, and that's the 3rd level, and it's reviewed by a panel of researchers here at PRI and also the Social Security Administration. So you're selected. What's next? You will have 1 month to submit a detailed work plan June 1st, 2018, which lays out exactly how you plan to conduct your research and make sure that it can be done in a timely fashion. This also will be reviewed, and upon approval of your work plan, you will receive the first installment of your award, which is $5,000. The following month, you will have your first in a series of calls with PRI staff, you and your mentor. These quarterly calls occur in August, November, February, and very early May or late April. Upon successful submission of your final paper, you will receive the 2nd installment of your award. Research stipends, frequently asked questions. Is there a budget reporting required for your stipend? No. Can my university accept the stipend payment directly and apply it to my account? Yes. If this is a group project, will both of us get a stipend? Let's try, though. but only one representative of the team will receive the payment, and you just need to let us know who will receive it. And can I pay participants in my research project with my stipend fund? Yes. So the timeline recap. The application deadline is March 1st, 2018. Your award notification is May 1st, 2018. Work is due June 1st, and your final project will be due June 30th, 2019. Just a few tips for success before I turn it over to the experts. Make sure that the topic that you choose is relevant, and Kristen referred to the suggested topics, which are listed on the ARDRAW website. Make sure that your research is feasible, that it can be completed in a year, that you'll have enough participants in your study, that you have access to data, and make sure you factor in time for your IRB review. And now it gives me great pleasure to introduce two current ARDRAW Small Grant Program awardees, Erin McCauley and Jeff Trant. We'll get off with Erin. Erin is a PhD student and a joint program in policy analysis and management and sociology from Cornell University. Erin is an expert at this small grant program. She's done 2 DDP grants, and this is her ARDRAW grant, but I'll let her explain a little bit more about that. She's a former high school Spanish teacher who is now in her second year of a joint doctoral program. Her research interests focus on the criminal justice system and the broader effects of mass imprisonment on historically marginalized populations, such as those with disability. She uses her background as a practitioner and training in community organizing in conjunction with traditional empirical research methods to conduct applied policy research-oriented research. Erin?
Hello, everyone. I'm just going to briefly describe the 3 projects because most of the tips have relate to specific projects that I've done. So the DDP grant I did was a mixed method project with a very heavy emphasis on qualitative, where me and a co-PI did interviews with imprisoned people with serious mental illnesses who were going through a disability determination process as part of an in-reach program. I then did a project with another co-PI where I used quantitative data that my advisor had access to experimentally evaluate housing and service interventions for families experiencing homelessness. And I am currently working on an ARDRAW grant where I'm doing a descriptive analysis exploring how the relationship between disability and labor force participation is shaped by education. And then I'm using the American Community Survey, which is a public access survey. Next slide, please. So I would definitely talk to IRB about your idea before you submit the grant. Obviously, the difficulty of IRB approval will vary a lot based on projects. For example, my qualitative project was a lengthy process to get approved, whereas using the American Community Survey at Cornell, I didn't really need IRB approval. I just got a letter saying that I didn't need it. I would talk to them early because there might be issues that you can address the application, so you don't have to kind of do that iterative process. Also submit early and then follow up quickly. Please submit my IRB the same day that I submit a grant application so that if I'm approved, I'm kind of ready to go. As the collection goes, getting that can be a little bit difficult depending on the population that you want to work with and kind of what type of data you're using. So it's an artful process for the qualitative project. We had to get a lot of institutional buy-in before we were allowed to speak to the participants. There's also a lot of data collection. So obviously with the American Community Survey, I'm doing no data collection, but if you're doing data collection yourself, I would definitely suggest working on a schedule. We did interviews with 29 participants and then transcribed all those interviews ourselves and then transcribed all of our field notes and then analyzed the entire process. And so we had to kind of schedule that time out, whereas my other projects have been public access or access through my advisor, which was not as challenging. You also, another good benefit of this project is that it is a short project that you kind of have to pump out in a short period of time, which keeps you really focused. So the being able to present my DDP-related work and my ARDRAW-related work at several conferences and publish the work. It's a fun way to kind of meet other people that are interested in disability work and talk up the program. It also kind of gives you legitimacy that comes from outside of your organization to be like, somebody approves of my research who's not from my university, which can be really helpful. Thank you. In general, my tips are to work with the ARDRAW team. Deborah and Margaret are amazing. So if you're worried that your question might not perfectly align, or you kind of have questions about the process or specific data, kind of anything, I would definitely suggest reaching out to them. They're really responsive and very nice. I would say plan and then plan a little bit more. I think really I always like to front load my work so that either I finish early, or if something comes up along the way, you still have time to finish on time to kind of work around that. And then related to my first tip, if anything does come throughout the process, reach out to the team. It's really great. It's kind of a short time frame, but you have so much support. And I would schedule it out kind of like an hourly part-time job. Like if I say I'm going to work 3 hours 1 week on the project, I make sure that I do, and that helps things move along. And the last thing to do is have fun with it. Find a question that you're passionate about, and then take advantage of the support that you have to get the project.
Those are wonderful suggestions. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Jeff Trant, who is a PhD student, second year, in the School of Social Welfare at the University of Albany. He's a social work practitioner with more than 10 years practice experience in community mental health, psychiatric rehabilitation, and supported employment services. His research interests include substance use disorders, mental health and co-occurring disorders, disability and workforce participation, Social Security work incentives, and multi-generational families. Jeff?
Great. Thank you, Margaret. Good afternoon. And I just want to say just kind of how privileged to be able to have an opportunity to speak to everyone about my project. You know, as a graduate student, having an opportunity to pursue extramural funding is just a tremendous opportunity, and I really want to encourage everyone, you know, to consider submitting an application. So I want to share a little bit about my experience with ARDRAW. So first, the project that I'm working on this year, examining the relationship among opioid misuse, disability, and employment, is a project where I'm conducting secondary data analysis, and advanced data analysis using public use data. I'm using the National Survey on Drug Use and Health to really do an exploratory study. You know, the opioid epidemic certainly is something that we're all hearing a lot about. It's been a part of my practice for a better part of the past 15 years, and there are just a lot of questions that need to be answered. And so this project is a good opportunity to start to explore you know, kind of some of the kind of the empirical kind of relationships that exist between folks who have different types of disabilities, and really my interests are looking at how opioid misuse influences and interferes with workforce participation. So I'm going to talk just really briefly about my experience. I really want to give some very kind of pragmatic hands-on tips, because I'm just thinking about you know, kind of where I was last year at this point in time, and I just had a lot of questions, and quite honestly, I didn't know what I needed to know. So the first thing I want to tell you is that strongly encourage everyone to first and foremost, you know, familiarize yourself not only with the RFA, but also Social Security's Redbook. So this was kind of an area of underdeveloped kind of knowledge that I had, and it's really important that you link the aims, objectives of your study to those, you know, kind of expressed in the RFA and SSA's policies and procedures. Secondly, I just want to second what Erin said. You know, consider, you know, kind of timeframes for your IRB approval process. Because I'm doing secondary data analysis, my project was actually able to receive an exemption, so that was easier this go around. However, for other projects, certainly, you know, IRB approval, you know, can be a methodical process. Secondly, you know, considerations around obtaining your sample, data analysis, those are all things that are going to be very project dependent. And then also ensuring that you build in, you know, kind of writing time, because, you know, really being able to, you know, to kind of synthesize everything and to cogently, you know, articulate the work that you've done. Don't underestimate the amount of time and resources that you need, you know, to put into that. So throughout my application process, the thing I want to say was that identification and coordination with my faculty member was absolutely key to my success. Kind of a theme of what I will kind of continuously go back to in the minutes I'm talking really is the relationship between that I have with my mentor and also with PRI. So that was very, very important. Also, one of the things that Margaret touched upon just are the criteria of what you need to submit. So certainly I'm always cognizant of allowing, adequate and sufficient time for your recommenders to write a letter of recommendation for you. As an adjunct faculty member, I know nothing is more frustrating than when someone comes to me at the last minute and asks for a letter of recommendation. So make sure that you provide, kind of folks with enough time. The other aspect of the application process that I just wanted to kind of communicate a little bit about that was so helpful was that after I submitted my application and after kind of the ARDRAW team conducted their reviews, and part of that is it goes through a peer review process. I got reviewer feedback, and in the peer review process, for myself, at the time I was a first-year doc student, it was so helpful to get feedback from experts in the field who were able to provide, kind of critical feedback on my methodology, kind of on the kind of my proposed kind of analysis plan, and that when I received kind of my feedback of kind of the plan of correction and the things and the conditions that I needed to meet in order, to have my project ended, there were 6 kind of areas that I needed to address. And that feedback immensely helped strengthen my proposal, and it was just a tremendous experience. So kind of in conclusion, all I want to say is that this is just a tremendous, tremendous opportunity, and that, planning is so important, and also please make sure, again, that you reach out, kind of to the team at PRI, because they're absolutely tremendous if you have any logistical questions or want to run something through them as a clearinghouse, because I found that to be just ever so beneficial. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. That was great. And really wonderful suggestions for everyone. I would now like to turn it over to Laura King, who is the Social Security Administration Federal Project Officer for ARDRAW, and she will introduce and moderate the presentations from SSA. Laura?
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Laura King, and as Margaret said, I'm the Federal Project Officer. I am so glad to have all of you joining us today. I'd like to thank Erin and Jeff for coming and sharing about their experiences. I hope that both of them have been incredibly useful for you guys. It's a treat for me to hear from them about their experience as well. So anyway, today I've invited a few of my colleagues to join us to share some additional information related to our suggested topic. Between the people on our panel, we have about 100 years of combined experience with SSA's programs, policies, and research. And each of them is an expert on the topic they'll be discussing today, and they all have real enthusiasm for the work they do. And so hopefully it'll wear on you guys and help you get excited about this as well, if you're not already well indoctrinated into it. As you can see from the slide, we're going to start with a discussion on how SSA determines if an individual is unable to work, which goes to the heart of the definition of disability set out by the Social Security Act. This will do a quick overview of SSA's work incentive policies and discuss how these policies are promoted and applied in practice. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how research and policy are connected, kind of give the how and why research is so important to us as policymakers, and kind of give you some tips on how to design your research to be useful in driving policy decisions. So with that, I'm going to introduce our first panelist, Larry Surowitz. Take it away, Larry.
Thanks, Laura. Before we get started talking about work-related factors and the disability determination process, we need to understand the statutory definition of disability. Please. Okay, so we define disability as defined in the Social Security Act as the inability to engage in any substantial gainful activity because of a medically determinable impairment. Any is really important here. But there's also a duration requirement, and the medically determinable impairment has to last for 12 months or is expected to last for 12 months or result in death. But as I said, the word any is extremely important. Basically, in order to be found disabled, one has to be expected to only perform a very few number of occupations in the national economy, or possibly even no occupations have performed in the national economy. Next slide, please. Okay, so before we go into the meat of it, we also need to understand what an RFC, or Residual Functional Capacity, is. And basically, an RFC is an assessment document that describes the most a claimant can do despite his or her limitations. It basically describes all functional limitations and as well as all work-related limitations and functional abilities that a person may have despite impairment. Let's go into how we, next slide please. Let's go into how we determine whether one is disabled or not. There's a 5-step sequential evaluation process we use. And first step is we look at whether the claimant is actually engaging in SGA. And SGA is basically a fancy word for work, and there's certain thresholds that determine whether one is working or not. Marcia and Debbie are going to go into this in a lot more detail in a second, but basically one can work, but only at below a certain threshold. So if a person is working, we stop, we deny the claim, and we don't go on any further. However, if the person is not working, we go on to step 2, and we determine whether the claimant has a severe impairment. And by severe impairment, it means a limitation or impairment that causes more than minimal work-related limitations. That's basically a very easy threshold to cross, and most claimants actually cross threshold. At the first step, we look at whether a claimant meets or equals one of our listings or impairment listings. And these listings are basically regulations that describe disabling impairments. And the impairments in the listings are considered so severe that they prevent an individual from doing, once again, any gainful activity, regardless of his or her age, education, and work experience. So if a claimant meets one of our listings, we allow the claim and we don't go on to step 4. However, if the claimant does not meet a listing, at this point we develop what's called the residual functional capacity that I explained to you earlier. So at step 4, we determine, based on the residual functional capacity, whether the claimant can perform his or her past work as he or she describes it, and as it's described in the national economy. So if the claimant can do his or her work as described as perform in the national economy, we do the claim, and that's the end of the story. We don't go on to step 5. However, if the claimant cannot do their past work, we determine whether there is other work that a claimant can do in the national economy. And next slide, please. In order to determine whether a claimant can perform other work, we look at 4 factors. And we look at the claimant's residual functional capacity. We look at his or her age. We look at the skills of the past relevant work that the claimant performs. And we look at the claimant's level of formal education. So the idea is that these factors can possibly significantly limit one's ability to adjust to other work as performed in the national economy. So one of these by themselves or in combination can so significantly limit the ability to work that the claimant can't perform many occupations or no occupations in the national economy. So these 4 factors are actually statutory, but there may be other factors that may be better indicators of one's ability to perform other work. And that potentially could be a topic of research. Just because these are statutory doesn't mean that we can't ask Congress to amend the statute, but we can possibly consider other factors as well. Next slide, please. So, consider RFC for a second, or residual functional capacity. And the underlying assumption of RFC is that the more restrictive one's RFC is, the less likely one adjusts other work, or less likely a person can do other work. And I guess that kind of makes sense. So let's go on to the next slide, please. The next thing we want to consider is age. And we basically age into these 4 categories. And I guess some questions for you is, do these make sense? Is there evidence out there that supports these 4 age categories? Assume that an older individual is less likely to just other work or do other work than a younger individual. But does evidence support this hypothesis? It's possible that a 49-year-old may find it actually easier to adjust other work than, let's say, a 20-year-old, because of maturity factors and life experiences. We assume that, let's say, a 49-year-old and 18-year-old are in the same category as far as being able to adjust other work. But is this category too broad, or not broad enough? What kind of evidence is there out there that may support this or refute this? And again, there are probably other topics out there, just like with the vocational factors. There are probably other topics out there considering age that one may want to consider. Go on to the next slide, please. And go to the next slide, please. I'm just going to kind of explain what's on the next slide. You can't see it. And basically, in order to, the way we define skill is we look at what's called Specific Vocational Profile, which is something that was developed by the Department of Labor. Basically, SVP is the amount of lapse time that's required for a typical worker to learn the techniques and acquire information to perform a certain occupation at a average performance level. We use SVP as a proxy for skill, but is there evidence out there that supports that idea? Are there better proxies for skill? Something be a topic for research. Let's look at, next slide please, let's look at how we break skill levels. We break them down into 3 levels: unskilled, semi-skilled, and skilled. And basically unskilled has an SCP of 1 or 2, semi-skilled has an SCP of 3 or 4, and skilled has an SCP of 5 through 9. Do these distinctions really make any sense? For example, SCP 1 basically requires a short demonstration period. SCP 2 requires basically a period of up to 30 days. SVP 7 SCP, for example, has a time-lapse requirement of 2 to 4 years. Do these breakouts actually make any sense? Does it make sense that we say that one cannot perform work at a higher skill level than one's past work? And I think about people who live in an area that's economically deprived. Does that mean just because they performed work at a lower level because of their the economy in the local area, does that really mean they can't perform work at a higher skill level? Basically, our program assumes that. Is that true? And like age and vocational factors are probably other topics that you want to consider with concerning skill. These are just things I thought may be right for research. The next level is, the next factor is education. Next slide, please. And here are the education categories we use. Basically, we have illiterate or unable to communicate in English, formal schooling of up to 6th grade, schooling between 7th and 11th grade, and high school education or above. Just the other categories like age, do these categories make sense? Somebody with a 7th grade education, the same ability to adjust other work as someone with a 11th grade education. One that's more interesting to me is high school or above. So we treat somebody with a high school diploma the same way we treat somebody with a PhD. And it's really true that somebody with a high school diploma adjusts other work in the same way that somebody with a PhD could. There's evidence out there that supports or refutes this. Another topic is where they may, another topic that I think is interesting, is quality of the education that they receive. We know that not all schools are created equal. Does somebody that receives, let's say, a high school diploma in an underperforming school district, do they have the same abilities to adjust other work as somebody that has received their diploma at a high-performing school? What about the role of special education? We say that somebody with special education that has a high school diploma is basically the same as someone who went through their school life and didn't receive special education services. But are they both equally prepared to adjust other work? And that's a topic I think that might be right for research. Just like the other topics, there are probably other topics that you may want to consider. These are just some of my thoughts. So let's go on to the next slide, please. So if you're interested, if you want more information about work-related factors and how we determine whether one is disabled or not, a good source might be the Code of Federal Regulations. And the topics that I just talked about are found in 20 CFR 404-1560 through 20 CFR 404-1568. Well, thanks, and I'm going to give the phone back to Laura.
Thank you, Larry. Okay, so next we're going to have Deborah Courtwright and Marcia Vaden-Robinson to talk about SSA's work incentives. And they've got lots of ground to cover, so I'm going to hand it on over to them.
Laura, can you hear me? Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can hear me.
Okay. Yes. So first of all, thank you for being here today and allowing us to talk to you a little bit about some of our SSA programs. Laura introduced us all as experts, and I just want to give my definition of what an expert is. An expert is someone who knows more and more about less and less until eventually they know absolutely everything about nothing at all. So I won't profess to be an expert in work incentives. There's always something new that you can learn, but we do have a lot of information and a lot of experience that we can share with you today. A little bit of information, first of all. What is a work incentive? Well, work incentives are SSA rules that can help beneficiaries keep their benefits while they're exploring the option of either starting work or returning to work. And by using these work incentives, they can make more money, gain new skills, and achieve greater independence to work. The intent of our work incentive programs are to support a beneficiary as they transition from receiving the disability benefits to returning to work. So as we talk, we're going to go over a lot of different things that will probably make your head spin. We expect you to remember everything we say today or know all there is to know about our work incentives. There is a helpful guide that we will talk about at the end that you can always go back to refer refer to. But what we would like you to think about is there are some of the programs and some of the supports that we are doing now, and maybe think about, are they the right supports? Are we doing the right things? Can they be improved upon? And also, is there something better out there? Is there something we're not doing that maybe that we should, that could help our disability beneficiaries really obtain the ability to go back to work? Okay, next slide. So first, before we even talk about the different work incentive programs, we need to make sure everybody understands we actually run two different disability programs. The first one is Social Security Disability Insurance, or SSDI, or sometimes we refer to it as Title II, and that's the one that provides benefits to disabled or blind people who are insured. And what we mean by this is when you get your paycheck, you know, there's a little bit of it that comes out and goes to this FICA. Well, what that is actually you're kind of paying like on an insurance policy, and those funds go into, of course, everybody knows for retirement, but what a lot of people don't realize is if something happens before you're old enough to retire and you become disabled, that's, again, how you possibly can qualify for a disability benefit by those payments that you made. Now, we run another disability program called Supplemental Security Income, or SSI. Sometimes we call it Title 16. And this is a program that makes cash assistance payments to aged, blind, or disabled people very limited income and assets. This is for the people that maybe never had the opportunity to pay the FICA. Maybe they became disabled at a very young age, or they came from another country, or something happened where they weren't able to work. You know, someone who maybe stayed home and raised children and never actually was in the workforce, and these people became disabled, so where do they turn? Now, there are limits on how much other income and how much assets the individual can have to qualify for that program. Next slide. So Larry briefly touched on one of our terms that we use to define disability, and that's substantial gainful activity, or what we call SGA. One of the common misconceptions about our disability programs is that people think, well, if you've become disabled or you want to file for disability through Social Security, you cannot work at all, nothing. And that's not exactly true. We do have a tolerance. You can do some work and still meet our definition of disability, as Larry described earlier. So what exactly is SGA? How do we measure that? Well, we look at whether or not it's work activity, and this can be either as an employee working for someone else or self-employed running your own business. We use it as a guideline to determine initial qualifications for disability for both programs, SSI and SSD, as Larry mentioned. But then we also use it to determine whether or not an SSDI, or Title II beneficiary, continues to qualify for disability as time goes on. For our SSI recipients, we use something else. What is one of the thresholds that we use? Well, one of the money amount that we look at basically is that if you are working and you are able to make more than $1,180 a month, then generally you would not be considered disabled by our programs. And also, if you're blind, the threshold would be $1,970. However, there are caveats. There are other things we can look at that even though you may be making, $500 a month, if you have certain expenses, incentives can help reduce what we count, and you may qualify for disability. So the next slide I'm going to talk about is trial work period, and this is only for the people who receive Social Security Disability or SSDI. Basically, it allows someone who is receiving that type of benefit, and they've been on benefits for a while, and decide they want to try their hand at going back to work, but there's that fear. The minute I go back to work that first month, are you going to stop my checks? No. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to allow you to experiment with your ability to work. And for 9 calendar months, they don't have to be consecutive, within a 60-month period, so over a 5-year period, you work and make what amount. You can make $1 million a month, and it will not impact your benefits. Once the 9th month, then then we start to look at which we'll go over in a moment. Consider to be services as a trial work month if you make $850 a month, or in this year, or work more than 80 hours of self-employment. Now, wait a minute. I just said you can make $1 million a month. Why do we have this figure here of $850? That's because if you make less than $850, it doesn't count as a trial work month. So this would be someone that works the polls at election time, makes, a couple $100 a month. That's not going to jeopardize or make them lose one of these trial work months. After the trial work period is over, the next thing we look at is what we call the extended period of eligibility, and it goes on for 36 months or 3 years. Basically, how that works is any month your earnings are over SGA, we would suspend the benefit for that month. You wouldn't be qualified for a check. Any month you'd be below the SGA threshold in that year, then you would get a check. So people can go in and out of receiving a benefit without having to reapply, without having to go through a lot of process. All they have to do is let us know what the wages are. Once when they reach the 37th month, is that it? Is it over? Well, it depends. If work is below SGA in the 37th month, so maybe they were working for a year and a half and then their disability acted up again and they were unable to continue, so they reached the 37th month and they're not at SGA, we'll continue the benefits and they will continue for as long as a person is not able to work above SGA. But the month that they do work above SGA, again, even if it's 4 or 5 years later, that's when we would finally terminate the benefits. Okay. Next slide. Now, again, I mentioned before that we look at this threshold of the dollar amount to determine SGA, but there's also other things that we evaluate and that could reduce what we're actually counting in their wages. And we're going to go over some of those in a moment. Impairment-related work expenses. We have something called subsidy and special conditions. Vacations and sick payments can be deducted, and any earnings not directly related to the work activity. I'm going to turn it over to my coworker, Marcia, and she's going to talk to you a little bit about impairment-related work expenses.
Thank you, and welcome. I know by now you're probably saying, okay, Deborah gave me a whole lot. I have a little bit more to give you, but just keep in mind, as Deborah said initially, you don't have to remember all this because at the end of our presentation, we do provide you with a resource where you can actually go online or get a hard copy to actually go get more information about these. So now we're going to talk about IRWE. IRWE is the cost of certain disability-related items and services that a person needs in order to work can be. Data from a person's gross earnings and determines substantial gainful activity for Title II, which they talked about, excluding a person's earnings and the SSI monthly payment amount. Certain IRWE requirements of service which enables a person to work. Items and services must be disability-related. Items or services must be paid by the individual with disability and are not reimbursed by another source, such as Medicare, Medicaid, or private insurance carrier. Expenses must be feasible. Example of an IRWE expense is transportation costs of a driver assistant, cabs, per transit, bus, or other types of transportation required because of disability. About subsidies and special conditions. Subsidies and special conditions, this is another work incentive or employment support, another name you can call them, that falls underneath for both of the programs, the Title II and Title 16. These is an employer may subsidize an employee with a disability by paying more in wages than reasonable value of actual services performed. The S is regarded as a subsidy rather than earnings when making the SGA determination. Conditions provided by someone other than employer. For example, a third-party coach paid for by vocational rehabilitation agency. Next, talk about is continuation of Medicare coverage. In this work incentive that is covered mainly under the Title 16 SSDI program. The coverage continues for at least 73 months after the WP, which Deb explained earlier. Part is premium free. When we say 93 months, we're talking roughly, say, 7 years. Medicare for the working disabled can be used beyond the 93 months. However, Part A is no longer premium free. I'm going to turn it back over to Deb.
We're going to a little on some of the work incentives that apply to our SSI beneficiaries. Also work incentives, and it's really, I don't consider it so much a work incentive as a reputation of how SSI benefits are figured out. But we allow the first $65 that a disabled individual earns, we don't count that at all. We deduct that $65, we only count $1 for 2 of what's remaining, or 50 cents a dollar. And then that total is what we use to apply against the benefit that they possibly receive, and that is what we would subtract from the maximum benefit. Next, I'm going to talk about the student earned income exclusion. The student earned income exclusion is tailored for our youth because we want to make sure that a young person with a disability is able to get some experience and some life skills in working without the worry about it affecting their benefit check. A lot of times they're still living at home. Mom and dad are depending upon that benefit check and really can't risk the chance of it being reduced because they need that to pay the household expenses. So they may be reluctant to say to the student, yeah, go ahead and try your hand at working. So student earned income exclusion applies to any SSI student under the age of 22 who is regularly attending school, and there's all kinds of definitions of what regularly attending school means, and it includes homeschooling. It allows us to exclude up to $1,820 a month of earned income, up to $7,350 a year for this year, 2018. It generally does go up every year. This allows a young person on SSI the ability to go ahead and work during the summer months and not worry about it affecting their check, or maybe over Christmas break, or maybe they're going to work the whole year through and, they're just going to work part-time, so they may only make, $100 a month or whatever. But it allows them to go out and test their ability to work, learn some skills, get some experience that they can use later on a resume. Turn back over to Marcia. She's going to talk a little bit about another program we have.
The PASS work incentive. PASS allows a beneficiary to set aside wages or other income besides SSI and or resources to pursue a work goal. Education, vocational training, assertive technology used for employment-related purposes, or starting a business. We do count the income that you set aside under PASS when we figure SSI payment amount. For example, a person could set aside money to go to school to get a specialized training for a job or to start a business. Next slide. Over to Deb.
Okay. The next thing I'm going to talk about is blind work expenses. Now, blind work expenses are very similar to what Marcia described earlier, impairment-related work expenses. And impairment-related work expenses apply to both programs. But impairment-related work expense has to be related to both the person's disability and work. Blind expenses is only available for the SSI beneficiary. And it only has to be related to blindness. It doesn't necessarily have to be related to the job. So, expenses that we would deduct when we're determining a blind individual's payment through SSI could be their guide dog expenses, the food, the vet bills. We exclude the taxes that they pay on any income that they earn, their lunches, their transportation. So this is something that is very helpful to individuals who are blind and receiving SSI and who want to work. Next slide. Marcia talked about continuation of Medicare coverage. And here's my little tip for how to remember which one goes with which. Medicare goes with the Social Security disability because Social Security cares. And Medicaid, which is aid, comes from the states. This is the coverage that most SSI beneficiaries are receiving is the Medicaid. And all the time we're hearing from people, you know, if I go to work and I make a good wage, that's fine, I can replace my benefit check. But the thing that scares me is I cannot lose my medical coverage. So for our Title II beneficiaries, Marcia explained how they can keep it for 7 years or more. For our SSI beneficiaries, it's a little bit different. How it works is that when an SSI beneficiary is working, they make above SGA, and we're not going to start and stop their checks like we do for a Social Security disability beneficiary. If working and we do all the deductions and other work incentives we can do from that wage, and the result is that when we compute their benefit check, they can still get at least $1. They'll continue to have their medical coverage. What happens if it really zeroes out? Because that's pretty scary for a person. That might make them not want to work or reduce their wages. Well, we also can allow them to continue to be eligible for Medicaid when, if we were to not consider their wages, but only any other income that they would have or other resources, we have qualified to get at least $1. If the answer is yes, we'll keep them on our roll so they don't lose that medical coverage, and that's very important for beneficiaries. The last thing we're going to discuss today is something called expedited reinstatement, and this does apply to both programs. And basically, this was something that came about because people had let us know that, you know, I return to work, I use your work incentives, I get off of benefits, and then what happens if I get sick again or I can't work anymore because of my condition? I got to start the whole process all over again. It took me 2-3 years to get benefits to begin with. I don't want to take that risk. So expedited reinstatement is a safety net for people who successfully return to work, lose their entitlement, so not getting a benefit check from us anymore. But within 5 years, then the work stops, and it's because of their disability. They still have the same disability. It allows them to come back and ask us to reinstate those benefits. While we're making sure, looking at their medical records, that they still meet our definition of disability, et cetera, we will start up their checks for at least 6 months of temporary cash payments while working that determination. I'm going to back over to Marcia now with the most valuable piece of information you'll get from our presentation today.
Yeah, by now you're probably saying, okay, so give us the information so we won't have to remember everything Deb and Marcia just discussed. Back when Jeff was initially at the beginning of this presentation discussing his experience, he mentioned the Redbook. The Redbook is a resource tool which we provide online via the agency's SSA.gov website, where you can view it online, where it gives a general understanding about the working of the employment support provisions or work incentives Deb and I just talked about. This document, which book application, which is actually read, is also available via the SSA website, where you can ask for a hard copy of the book. So it gives an overall view of all the work incentives we talked about and any additional information about those work incentives which Deb and I just briefly discussed. Thank you. So I'll turn to Laura.
Thank you, ladies. Much information. But yes, like they said, the Redbook is available online because taking all of that is a lot. So next I'm going to turn it over to Marjorie McIver and let her talk about how we apply all of these work incentives that all work in the real world. So, Marjorie?
Thanks, Laura. Hello, everybody. My name is Marjorie McIver, and I am a project officer here in the Office of Beneficiary Outreach and Employment support. And I want to talk to you briefly about two more employment support programs, and then we can talk a little bit about why we want to understand the effects of our programs. Next slide, please. So the first program I want to cover is the Ticket to Work program. The Ticket to Work program is designed to build diversity in the types of rehabilitation programs that are available to our beneficiaries. Under the Ticket to Work, Social Security has agreements with organizations that provide a broad range of employment supports to beneficiaries at no cost. We call these organizations employment networks, and we have close to 600 employment networks, and we have agreements with them. They provide a range of services. As you can see from the slide, some of them actually provide assessments and vocational rehab. Some might just help the beneficiary get a job. So these services are free to participants, and they're voluntary for both the employment network and the beneficiary. Next slide, please. Another service we provide is Work Incentives Planning and Assistance, or WIPA. We currently have 83 WIPAs in the U.S. and territories. WIPA services are free. WIPAs help beneficiaries receive accurate information about work supports and work incentives, are interested in attempting or returning to work so they can make a smooth transition to work. So all those things Marcia and Deb just talked about, WIPA actually helps the individual understand them and understand which ones apply to them, which ones they can access, which ones they can use as they try to go back to work or to work for the first time. So they understand how work will affect their benefits, they understand which work incentives they can use. They also learn to understand the effect of work on other programs that they're accessing. So maybe their housing or their food stamps. What impact will work have on that? And all these things really need to be planned out ahead if we want to have a smooth transition back to work or to work for the first time. So it's very individualized, and the support can be long-term. It can go on for a few years. As Deb mentioned, for instance, the trial work period, that's a 9 months, and they don't even have to be consecutive. So a person could actually be transitioning from work to work off of benefits. The whole transition could take a few years. But we want it to be sustainable and to work. And we leave the information, giving our beneficiaries the information helps them and us have a successful transition. So they also educate beneficiaries about reporting responsibilities. Again, we want to help the beneficiaries anticipate changes or concerns that may derail the work attempt. And one of the most common things that can happen if people don't have the correct information is they don't report when they go back to work for Social Security, and they become overpaid. So we want people to go to work. We want them to work to improve their economic stability for the long term, and we're always looking for ways and policies that will help this. As you can see, it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of program. We have lots of different things going on, which can make it more complicated, but it also means that there's hopefully something for everybody. Next slide, please. So the slide shows information on our Ticket to Work program, our WIPAs. We have the Ticket to Work website and phone number. The Ticket to Work helpline, beneficiaries can call the helpline and get information about the employment networks. Those are the agencies I told you about earlier, where there's almost 600 of them. And then they also can be referred to their local WIPA. There's at least, one WIPA in every state. Some states have multiple WIPAs. They also have WIPAs in the territories. So folks can call there and get referred to the WIPA. They can call to get information about ENs or employment networks. And they can also call just to get some basic information about work incentives. Slide, please. So what we decide to research is important. Public policy has real-world effects on vulnerable people. We always need to remind ourselves here at Social Security that our policy affects real people, everything we do, all our programs, all our procedures, and as you can see, they're complicated, and we sometimes have adverse effects. So we need to kind of think through everything. So I would to think of some real-world situations And there's so many. I can think about people who have changes in their benefits. Sometimes maybe they've had an increase to their check. Their check increases by $1 or maybe $5, and just that simple increase could knock them off another program. Marcia and Deb described the work incentives, and for our beneficiaries, whether or not they're able to access some of these supports could be the difference between them continuing to receive their disability benefits or their benefits ceased. So knowing about the different policies, being able to access them, it's all important. Also could be very interesting for some research. So another one, another big problem I sort of mentioned earlier, is, and it's really one of our most common issues with people returning to work, is folks want to work, they want to try work, so they go out and they do it without really knowing our policies and our rules, only come in a few months later or a year later to find out that they're overpaid. The normal reaction to that is to quit the job immediately, and then also to probably not return to work or be very fearful about returning to work in the future. So that's something that is a continuing concern for us. So why do we encourage research? Well, we need to understand the real-world effects of our policies and programs. With our disability programs and work supports, our goal is to improve economic stability. If we go to work, we want the work to pay, and we want it to be sustainable. We also need to understand if the assumptions that we're using to develop our policies are correct, or if the policies themselves fit our mission to provide the best services we can to our beneficiaries. And I will turn it over to Laura.
All right, thank you, Marjorie. She's told you a little bit about why it's so important that we try to always make sure our policies are the best policies we can possibly make for all of our beneficiaries. Next, I'm going to turn it over to Taffy, and she's going to give you some tips on connecting your research so that it can be used for policymaking. So, Taffy?
Hi. I am thrilled you are all out there and interested in this. We need you. We need really interesting projects and worthwhile. So, I know you know a lot about research. You are, after all, graduate students. But what I wanted to do was help make some connections between not only why it's important for people, as Marjorie was just talking about, but the kind of research projects you're able to do in a short period of time really can provide decision makers with information that either lets us know what's working, what's not working, why it's not working. And there are really about 5 areas that when you have your research question, you have your design, and you've laid it all out, I've learned now, in my old age, to go to the end and think about the policy implications, where I used to just do the research, have a great time, and then figure out at the end, when I had my conclusions, how this matched up with policy. And I'm encouraging you to do now is to flip that on its head, because what works and what doesn't work, there are really about 5 areas in policy we want to focus on. Is the policy adequate? Is what you're suggesting or a recommendation you're coming up with to speak to adequacy of a policy? We also need to know that the system we set up to help people in hard times is equitable. And if we change our work incentives, or if we change like the extended work period, eligibility period, is this equitable for everybody in the system? And very much related to that, there's a question about program integrity. We have values in our system. We put the Social Security Act together a long time ago because we value our workers, disabled workers. We want to give people this chance to get back to work if they can. So we need to know that any policy changes that we're thinking about also uphold that kind of integrity of the system. We're also really interested all the time, as you can well imagine, what we can simplify. You know, we don't want to oversimplify so that people get confused, but we do want to make it more accessible to people who have to use our systems. And also, from the SSA side of the bench, we're also interested in what, since we have to manage a workload that covers basically the United States population, it's always good to think about policies that can affect our workload management. So those are kind of the things to get into focus when you're thinking more about policy. And then I have on the remainder here, I have 4 kind of pillars of what will help you do this, most of which you're already familiar with. What they look at is validity, what's achievable and doable, whether it's principled, and whether it's concrete, to make a map of what you'd like to see. And I want to tell you now, at the end of this, I have a reference list, impossible to see on the slides, but you'll be able to see on your printouts. Wilcox and Hirschfield in 2007 from the UK. They're one of the sources, and I really liked their framework with these pillars in it, so I borrowed a lot from them. So you need to, in the validity soundness, you need to assess your internal validity. Are you really looking at a cause-effect relationship? Can you really can you really generalize from what you've found to other aspects of policy? And really measure the relationship that most tells you about what you're doing. The example I have shown here is you come up with a great scale to measure disability or impairment that might come out of psychiatric challenges. But your scale is so good at measuring psychiatric challenges that it measures all of them except the one condition you were most interested in, then you'd want to rethink how you're approaching your problem. The other aspect of feasibility, the second pillar, and achievability is, number 1, can you do it in a year? Number 2, are there data out there that is going to let you explore the causal and relevant variables you want to look at? And when you begin to tease out whether or not it carries policy implications. One of the examples I thought about a lot is, say, setting up your design. Your return to work is the dependent variable. You're trying to find independent variables, causal variables, like different types of impairment, age disability, the onset of the disability. Are those kind of questions, and how long they've been out of work? That's another big one usually. Can you manipulate, do you have data that allow you to manipulate that? Even if you don't have data that allow you to manipulate some of the variables you want to look at, can you look at some of them and then show that, okay, in my year-long research project, I have limitations. This is where more research ought to be done. We get wonderful ideas usually from what people can't do what they set out to. As you know, as good researchers, all research has ethical consequences. Beneficence, equity, the rights of individuals, dignity of persons. have you stumbled upon a research question, some data, some policy implications, point to something they want to suggest, but it may not affect all the beneficiaries alike. It might give a huge advantage to people who do have an advanced education or who are 50s but starting at work. These are some of the things you need to tease out. Usually, a lot of this ends up as unintended consequences. I'm a qualitative researcher. You always have to deal with that in qualitative research, and I encourage everybody using numbers to deal with that too, because you can't always tell by the numbers. And at the end, this fourth pillar is, okay, you've identified the policy. You've made some suggestions. Can you link the changes that you see here, recommended changes, to what's out there? And you link it to who's going to do it. If you are arguing for a change in policy, who are the actors who are going to carry it out? Are readily apparent. There are always going to be stakeholders like the beneficiaries, the families, the larger society. But they're like community advocacy groups who may be able to play a big part in making a change, or who you would want to help, SSA or a vocational rehab provider, a change that would make the policy better for the system. And as you try to map this out, very hard to do, you also get a sense of whether or not this is practicable. Is the change you're thinking about or suggesting or wondering about, is this a 5-year change? Or is this something that you could start now, work through the years? Where would the impact of the change be the greatest? What stakeholders to work the hardest to make this happen, and who are going to get the benefits of change? And of course, it's best if society and SSA and everybody wins, but that's not always possible. Oh, and I forgot to say next slide ever. But the last slide, now that I'm on it, is this reference list I put together, and some of these are ones I used, as I mentioned, but others I tried to look at and see if they might be good for, almost anything you're trying to do. They're kind of broad brush kind of ideas. So that's it from me. Thank you. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Taffy, for sharing with us. I know we collectively, as this panel, has thrown a lot of information at you. If you are digesting it over the next couple of days and you have a question specifically for one of our panelists, please send it to the ARDRAW box, and we will make sure it gets to each of the panelists as necessary. Anyway, thank you to all of my colleagues, and I'm going to turn it back over to Margaret and Kristen, and I guess it's time for questions.
Yes, it is. We do have about 10 minutes before the end of the webinar that we can hopefully answer some of your questions. We would ask that you type your question in the Q&A panel located underneath the participant tab. And or if you would like to ask a question by phone, please raise your hand by clicking the hand icon in the participant pod, and we'll unmute you so you can ask your question related to today's webinar. Before we open to questions, I will tell you that this webinar is being recorded, and it will be posted on the ARDRAW website shortly. and that if we don't get to your question, or if, as Laura said, additional questions come to mind over the next couple of weeks before you submit your application, please send it to the ARDRAW mailbox, which is in the third bullet, ARDRAW@policyresearchinc.org. And we will respond promptly. And if it's a question that you have for any one of today's panelists, we will make sure that it gets to them as well. We'll give a few minutes to type a question into the Q&A box. Yeah, it is possible to get a copy of the slides. They will be posted along with the recording on the ARDRAW website. Yes, we have a question about an example of what to provide for proof of access to data. Well, if you're using publicly available data, such as data from the Social Security Administration website, you just need to let us know that. If you're going to do research where you're interviewing people, we would like a letter from the agency. For example, if you're going to interview some people who are at a specific agency, a letter of support from the executive director of the agency stating that he has given you permission to access people at their agency. Courtney, we have a question if a potential applicant is currently applying to graduate schools and a full-time or part-time graduate student at the time of the award, which is fall 2018. Right. If you meet that criteria, you're all set. Oh, we get this question a lot. We have a question about someone who has addressed some of these issues and as part of her dissertation research. The ARDRAW program is a small grant program, can be used to support part of your dissertation, but it has to be a discrete program. It's project, paper, product. At the end of the program in June 2019, you can certainly to explore, but it is a part of your dissertation, but it is not your dissertation or from it. And I would say if you have specific questions, please reach out to me directly or to the ARDRAW mailbox. Well, one of the letters of recommendation would come from your faculty advisor for your project. The advisor at the time of application. Any other questions? Any commitment? The question about discrete project or deliverable, if you will, to use another term. Let me follow up with you. Shoot a question to ARDRAW, and I can go into it in more detail with you. You're welcome. I thank all of you, and I certainly want to thank Laura and the wonderful SSA presenters and Aaron and Jeff for being part of this webinar. I have put our contact information slide up on the web right now, and please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We look forward to hearing from all of you who attended this webinar. And with that, I think I will say good afternoon to all of you, and have a good rest of your day. Thank you.